everyone, I'm Alma and I'm a reenactress. Today I'm here to introduce a part of the knowledge we have about the Celtic spirituality. First of all, I feel that I have to specify what we usually call Celts really were. We may be used to think about the Celts as a big single population, just divided in a lot of small inhabited centers. But they actually were a multitude of different tribes with a common origin. So what we refer to as Celts was a big set of people with a common origin known as Proto-Celtic, whose place of birth was supposed to be the area all around Hallstatt around the year 1000 AC. But around 300 AC, in the period of the greatest expansion, we could find the Celtic villages extending from today's Portugal to Asia Minor. During this mass migration, they moved so far we can classify them in macro areas, where different villages' finds showed more common things. As we can see in the picture, we have insular Celts, with Britons, Picts, Gauls, and others. Hispano-Celts, with Celtiberians, Astures, Cantabri, Transalpine Gaul, with the Boii, Gauls, Helvi, Cisalpine Gaul, with Ambari, Insubres, Senones, Central Europe, with Briuci, Anartes, Eravisci, Eastern Celts, in the areas of Dacia and Tracia, with Osi and Anarti, and Asia Minor, with Galatian tribes. What united them instead was what we call Druidism. The Druidism concerns many aspects of life, from a common lifestyle, we are talking about agriculture, farming, metallurgy, to a common language of origin, which then developed into branches over time, Gaelic and Britannic, to a philosophical, juridical, metaphysical and religious systems. Practically, the Druidism is the embodiment of the Celtic civilization. In fact, the Druid wasn't just a magician with a golden sickle harvesting mistletoe that we are used to think of. Instead, his figure was the center which all the Celtic society revolved around. They dealt with each kind of public matter, from the resolution of disputes to sanctioned penalties, from what concerns spirituality to being a royal counselor. In fact, the Druid consisted in a real social class, which everyone could access after long years of studies and internships. It was supposed to be about 20 years, at the end of which each individual was specialized in carrying out different tasks. We can say they were the true keepers of the Celtic knowledge in all areas. One of their most important duties was to mark the times of the year, often with big celebrations. They had two main celebrations which indicated the beginning of the two seasons of the Celtic year: Samhain or Samonios, which depends on the language you're using, to celebrate the beginning of winter, and Beltane or Beltrin to celebrate the beginning of summer. Samhain literally means the end of summer, and was a celebration concerning all the people of the tribe. During the days of the ceremony, there was a fair with large banquets. The community dealt with political, economic, and religious affairs, and certainly there was no lack of rights. All the people were focused on solving their pending accounts in view of the new year. In the night of Samhain, they also believed the gates between the worlds were open, letting the world of spirits join ours. During Samhain, practically everything was at stake. On the other hand, Beltane literally means fire of bell, and was a more priestly celebration than Samhain, which mostly the Druids were involved in. Nevertheless, there were ceremonies, games, and assemblies, but the most important part consisted in purifying rites to propitiate for an abundant and luxuriant season. From what has come down to us over the centuries, we can say that in all probability the rites consisted in purification with fire, letting the herbs walk through rows of flames, in protection spells casted on animals and fields, in branches planted in the ground, and maybe something more that we'll never know. Besides these two main festivities, we acknowledge two others, Imbolc and Lugnasad. The first one can be compared with a village festival and concerns spirituality. Unfortunately, we know very little about it. It took place around the 1st of February. The second one, on the other hand, was more of a royal party, with games and horse racing, during which a king would show all his majesty. It took place around the 1st of August. In the picture, we can see a representation of the distribution of celebrations throughout the Celtic year, with the Samhain and Beltane marking the change of the seasons. Celebrations were often, if not always, held at tidy villages, commonly deep in woods or forests. In fact, the Celts had sacred lands rather than sacred builds. They hadn't built temples until they were incorporated into other cultures, and they didn't erect many years old dolmens, because these had been more ancient than the Celtic civilization. Their sacred places were open spaces in close contact with nature, such as clearings, hills, or springs, at most marked with circles of stones or mounds. Each of these were conceptually the center of the world in Celtic beliefs, spots where the human being could enter in contact with the spiritual world easily, where the occult energy of the earth conveys, forming a large basin of power potentially available to everyone, but only the druids knew how to use that. The Celts had a lot of those. Some were used for celebrations, as said before. Some were the sites of the druids' retreat. Others were still considered so sacred even the druids couldn't access them, and so on and so forth. The name most commonly attributed to these places is Nemeton. We can find many citations about them in Roman texts, from Dione Cassio to Caesar until Strabone, and they always contain the root of the word nemus, such as Nemora Alta, Drumeton, Belnementon. Therefore, each of these represents a sacred land, where the energy of the earth meets the energy of the sky, idea literally translated by the Celtic word nem. The choice of the location of this Nemeton shows us once again the straight link between the Celts and nature, consequently bonded with a large use of the natural magic. It's true that they had a big knowledge of natural remedies, which, combined with their strong spirituality, started a set of wonderful rites and beliefs. They had sacred plants and trees that only the druids could harvest with special rituals, such as mistletoe, selagos, samoldus, and verbena. Each of them has proven therapeutic qualities. To do magic or cast spells, they used specific trees, used tips to do powerful spells, hazel and rowan for magical operations. Still others had a great moral suggestion. For example, the apple tree was a tree of immortality, acknowledgement, and wisdom. Lots of Celtic tales are about heroes saved by an apple, or who have gone through severe trials to get to the apple tree of Avalon. The oak was a symbol of science and power, the material representation of divinity. They probably represent one of the most successful Indo-European examples of harmony of a human society with nature and spirituality. Another interesting topic is about their use of writing. We have evidence that for practical purposes, such as reports and trades, Celts usually used foreign alphabets. Caesar testified in his writings to their use of Greek, for example, but that doesn't mean they didn't have their own alphabet or written language. They just used it very little, and mostly for spiritual and magical purposing, keeping it available only to the druids class. This differentiates them from most populations of that era, who have developed writing mostly to preserve their knowledge in texts and for keeping records. This is probably due to their mainly oral tradition, combined with the belief that the story must be kept alive, and thus seeing in the written word a kind of fossilization of the latter. Celts definitely believe in the dominance of the spoken word. The Celtic alphabet is called Ogham and is also known as the alphabet of the trees. The first reason for this denomination is found in the way the characters are written. They consist in a straight vertical line with two angled dashes at the bottom, and the letters were composed of strokes above the vertical one, from 1 to 5. As you can see, the word written in this way remembers a tree. The dashes are the roots, the straight central line is the trunk, and the letters are the branches. The second reason is linked to the name attributed to letters, each of which corresponds to a tree. But I would like to specify, not all scholars are completely in agreement on this, due to the presence of different breathagrams in early Irish literature. Breathagrams are two word kennings which explain the meanings of the letters of the Ogham alphabet. 3 different lists of them have been preserved, but even these last ones often disagree on the interpretation, leaving us many doubts as to what the exact source is. Here you can see a reconstruction of how some Ogham could have been engraved on natural support, in this case sticks. As you can notice, each stick is made of a different wood. This is because each tree is linked to the multiple meanings of the different letters. However, one thing is for sure, each letter was full of different meanings. Presumably, this is due to its early uses as a mnemonic scheme to aid in the memorization of the Druidic erudition, where each letter was related with certain teachings, like animals, birds, trees, gods, clans' names, sacred plants, and more. Unfortunately, we don't have very ancient artifacts, due to the use of mostly natural supports, like barks or sticks, and due to their reluctance about writing, they may have used it primarily as body language. The fingers of the hands represent the strokes of the letters, and the nasal septum or shins as straight central line. Most of the finds is dated around the 5th or 6th century, and consist in stones largely found in the British Isles. This was a time when the Celtic community was still present in those areas, but who had already begun to suffer the first foreign influences. These photos show stones found in the British Isles. You can see the Ogham engraved along one of the edges, which replace the vertical center line, with the strokes forming the letters. Hundreds of similar artifacts have been found on these islands, and not only there. In conclusion, the Celts were a fascinating people, with a huge cultural and spiritual baggage, handed down orally by the class of Druids, without which the Celtic civilization could have never existed, and vice versa. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.